I had noticed in 3 of the clients I'd been working with, over 2 years, for each of those clients, I had managed to secure with them a multi-year 6-figure grant. And there were some patterns. This was a really beautiful report. It was clearly not written by a fundraiser. It was way too long, but I was absolutely captivated by it. It broke all the rules. If you're approaching a funder for the first time, go small, go conservative. Yes, ask for what you need, but test the water and don't ask for too much if you're not known to each other. It's that the prior relationship is the key thing.
Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This is episode 151. My name's Rob Woods, and this is the show for fundraisers who want ideas and perhaps a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and love your job. Just before we get into it, I want to say a huge thank you to all you wonderful people who've been spreading the word about our show in the last couple of weeks. In particular, a grateful shout out to Laura, Steve, Gemma, Joanna, Sally, Alison, Kirsty, and everyone else who's kindly been talking about the show on social media or who's got in touch with me to let me know it's been helping you. I really appreciate your help. This time, we're focusing on trusts and foundations fundraising, and in particular, what it takes to access game-changing 6-figure donations. I was so pleased to talk to one of the very best in the business, Caroline Danks. In the last couple of years, Caroline has worked with 3 different charities who've received especially valuable grants. And in this chat, I enjoyed the chance to pick her brains about some of the things she noticed that they all had in common. I always get so much valuable insight when I talk to Caroline, and I hope that you will too. Hello, Caroline. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rob.
The listeners don't know this, but for several years you've come along and done some wonderful sessions about trust fundraising for fundraisers who are in our Bright Spot Members Club. And more than once we've had a conversation before or after that when I introduce you about we must do a podcast of some kind. Anyway, thank you for being patient. And finally, it's here. And I love this topic that you offered to talk about. But before we get into that, so that the listeners have a context, you are a hugely experienced fundraiser, especially in the high value space. You used to work for sometimes large charities. You've worked for some very small charities as well. Your company is called Lark Owl. And am I right? The balance is a lot of consultancy, some training and so on?
Yes, I'm a fundraiser, trainer, writer, coach, all the things. I've been fundraising for, it'll be 20 years this year. My specialisms are trusts, major gifts, capital appeals, and then I work with my partner, Tony. So I'm the morning lark. He's the night owl. I do the voluntary fundraising. He does the commercial earned income side of things. We like to think we're a good team. So yes, that's a bit about me, about us.
Very good. And we'll make sure we put a link in the episode notes for people who want to find out more about Lark Owl. And I so enjoyed the email you sent to me the other day because you had noticed an interesting pattern in some results you've been getting for some charities that you do consultancy and fundraising help for. Do you want to tell us what that thing was that you noticed?
Absolutely. So part of my work is to provide an interim trusts and foundations fundraising service for charities. So I'm there, I'm doing the trust fundraising, like I know a lot of you listening are as well. And I had noticed in 3 of the clients I'd been working with, over 2 years, for each of those clients, I had managed to secure with them a multi-year 6-figure grant. And there were some patterns. So if I tell you a little bit about each charity and about the grant, then maybe we can get into the things that I noticed that were very similar. So the 3 clients I'll tell you about. The first one was a small charity, turnover of about $500,000 a year. And half of that was coming from earned income, half from fundraising, mostly trusts and foundations. They work in the arts, educational, music space, providing music education for children in schools, especially children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So that's either sort of socially, financially disadvantaged or children with special educational needs. And I worked with them to secure a 3-year grant of £248,000. And then the next charity had been around for about 10 years, so less well established than the arts charity. That's a charity working in, I would say, women's rights space, focused on policy, activism, and women's involvement in politics. They've been around for a long time, but they had not been a registered charity for very long. So they did not have the 2 years' worth of accounts that many trusts and foundations will ask you to have before you apply. So that limited us significantly, but it didn't stop us succeeding. They raised £180,000 to be spent over 3 years, and their turnover is about £100,000. So really significant chunk of their core cost was covered by that grant. And then the third charity, a startup charity, very small, again, working in the women's space, delivering direct work with women who experience multiple challenges in their lives, multiple barriers to employment. And this charity, very small, but they'd worked out a way to get women who have perhaps never worked before or who haven't worked in a long time through a group work programme and then into work experience or employment. And they were very new when I started volunteering for them. They had, again, a year's worth of accounts, so not the 2 years that you really need when you're applying to trusts and foundations, turning over about £100,000, and they managed to raise £190,000 over 3 years. So again, game-changing grant for a very small, very new charity.
Yeah, they're all amazing, aren't they? But that last one is truly extraordinary and transformational in terms of a tiny charity or pretty small charity being able to do that vital work on the ground. So you've got my attention, Caroline. Out of all of that, when the dust settled, A, because you were involved in it, and B, because you're very experienced and you have seen patterns like this in fundraising generally, what's the first thing that leapt out at you for these three that got these really massive gifts?
I'll share 4 things today that were common across all of these 3 big gifts. So the first thing that I noticed, and this is interesting because, as I've said, a couple of these organisations really haven't been around for very long, but the first thing I noticed was that there was a prior relationship with each of the funders, and that this was not the first gift that a charity had received from each of these funders. So there was a prior relationship there. So I'll give the example of the tiny startup charity, the local charity working with women. They're based here in Plymouth, which is where I live, and they had managed to get a small grant from National Lottery Awards for All, £10,000. And they had sent the most incredible report to describe to the funder exactly what they'd done with the money. And this was a really beautiful report. It was clearly not written by a fundraiser. It was way too long, but I was absolutely captivated by it. It broke all the rules. It was very colourful, lots of pictures of the women doing the work, lots and lots of graphics with stats explaining the difference that this small programme had made, this smallish £10,000 had made. So lots of graphics, lots of stats, lots and lots of quotes from the women that were not redacted or changed. They were clearly, these women's voices were like talking to me through the page. As I say, they'd included more information than they'd needed to. They'd included an example of a discussion that the women had had amongst themselves about whether or not they were going to include trans women. And it was a really honest reportage of the conversation that had happened. And there was a quote from one of the women who said, I've experienced so much discrimination and disadvantage in my life. I expect that most trans women have too. Therefore, I think we probably have more in common and they should be welcome into our group. I was just captivated by it. The end of the report, the final page of the report, was a rewriting of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which the women had written, and the lyrics basically speak of the experiences that they have in trying to forge better lives. And it was just joyful.
And for context, that was possible because this was presumably part of an exercise they'd been doing in one of the groups to help them in their journey with confidence and accessing work opportunities and so on. And the fundraiser, or the person, I guess, who runs the charity, asked their permission to use this amazing lyric.
Yeah, and it was brilliant. And they were seeking a larger grant from the funder. So they'd gone for the smaller grant first. I mean, that's a great little tip. If you're approaching a funder for the first time, go small, go conservative. Yes, ask for what you need, but test the water and don't ask for too much if you're not known to each other. It's that the prior relationship is the key thing. So then they were in a much better position to ask for that big multi-year gift because they had reported back so beautifully on the small grant that they'd initially received.
So that's a brilliant tip anyway for our listeners, just to do something that they can say yes to start the relationship. But I am interested, this very large one wasn't the fourth application. This was the second thing after that excellent report about the difference the first gift has made.
Yeah, something to say on that further into our conversation when I get to point number 4. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. How interesting, Caroline. And you saw that same pattern with the other two?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other charities that I worked with, again, they'd not been in official existence for a long time. They'd only been a charity for a couple of years. Before they had become a registered charity, they'd managed to access a charitable trust that support sort of early stage activism, mobilisation. So they'd gone very niche and they'd managed to really fit the criteria and the wishes of that funder with what it was they were trying to achieve. Now, when they became a registered charity, that funder has connected charitable trusts that they were then eligible to apply to. So it was becoming a registered charity that sort of opened up the gates to more opportunity. But it was also, in those early days, recognising that their options were limited. So therefore, when they did approach the funder, they just had to be crystal clear that the thing that they were doing was absolutely in alignment with what the funder wanted their money to do. Again, that's great advice for all fundraisers all of the time. We probably don't spend enough time on research. I know it's something that I tend to sort of push to the back of the pile when things feel busy and when I'm in that sort of reactive mode and when I'm worried about meeting my targets. That research is never wasted time. It's always such a helpful thing to remember.
Okay, and what was the second thing in this pattern you noticed?
So it's connected to the first thing. So connected to the prior relationship. Because there was a prior relationship and there was conversation and there was back and forth, there was then no surprise to the funder when that request for that big gift came in. And when I look back across 20 years of fundraising now, I don't think I can remember, well, I cannot remember a time, I cannot give you a specific example of a time I wrote an application for a 6-figure plus gift, sent it off and got the money. No, it was always done in collaboration with the funder, building on that prior relationship and making sure that, it's the same with major donors as well, isn't it? When you land that ask, it's never an out of the blue surprise. It's as a result of conversation, collaboration, understanding what it is each party wants to achieve, and then making sure that ask meets everybody's needs. So there was no surprises. So don't send a surprise application for £500,000. There will be examples out there of where that's been successful. But in my experience, and certainly across these 3 grants, that was not the case. They were very much planned with the funder together.
And can you give an example from one of those 3 of how they managed to have that conversation? Because I know that some trusts and foundations do and or feel they need to keep us at arm's length and don't always, pick up the phone or even publish a phone number and so on. Can you tell us about one of them and how they managed to get a conversation or conversations so that relationship could develop leading up to it being finalised as this opportunity to give?
So in all three of these cases, all the funders were very receptive and open to having conversations. And I think that all of these three funders would be open and receptive to have a conversation with any charity that fits the criteria that they publish publicly. So you do get a lot of funders that are very quiet and under the radar, but that's definitely not what I'm talking about here. These are very kind of established funders with very open processes. And in my experience of working across these three grants, these are funders that are willing to have phone calls. And of course, that is made a lot easier when there's a prior relationship. You then have the name of somebody, you have their direct contact details, they know your name, and getting started is the hardest bit. But once you've started, there is a momentum there, and there was a momentum there that enabled the conversation. Now, for the charity working in music education, they'd had a grant in the past from a funder. And what that funder wanted to do was to test and gather the evidence for one of the programs. They wanted really to be able to prove that the program was beneficial and that it worked. And can we be really, really confident in the outcomes? So they paid, I think, for that work, for the impact monitoring, for the evidence gathering, and then for some academic study. And there was some rigor applied so that they could be really confident that this thing works. So we did that and it worked. So it just felt like the next natural step for this funder and this charity, for them to come together and say, right, we know this works now. So actually, let's work together to roll this out so that more children have access to a musical education. And there was absolutely no surprise when that application landed. There was conversation back and forth between funder and charity. There was an interview. There was feedback on a draft.
The relationship was so good that they sent it through to the funder so that in an informal capacity, they could give their view on if this was the right kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think that was the funder doing themselves a favour, because this is a funder big enough to have staff. So this staff member wanted to be really confident that what they were presenting to trustees was going to be, in the best possible format for them.
I love this. And also it's just heartening that this is the way good things tend to get done. I think it's a little depressing, this notion of things being dry. Once a year, things get opened and read, and then the decision is made by 12 o'clock and so on. The fact that it is two vested parties that care about an issue in genuine cooperation, coming to an agreement on what the right thing to do would be, is just encouraging, I think, for good grant giving and effective charity work to be delivered.
Absolutely. And I would love to see more of this.
And in terms of this pattern, we've covered the first two in terms of a prior relationship before this larger request for funding, and then it being this ongoing conversation so that it's not a surprise when that application lands. What's the third thing you noticed?
Yeah, those three grants that I've secured with the team have been very much with the team, and they've required significant involvement from across the organisation. So, from meetings with the chief exec or the founders to really understand those bigger questions around the vision and the strategy and the risk and the future plans. And then speaking with individual staff members who operationally will be delivering the work for which the grant is paying. So trying to understand the nuances of their roles, and often working with them to get the answers to specific questions that funders are asking. Again, the example that I gave at the beginning about that fantastic report that the women's charity had written, it really, really helps to have comments and stories and to have as much of your application informed by and with the people that benefit from the work. it does make a difference. It brings it to life.
Hi, it's Rob, and I wanted to let you know about our 2 flagship courses designed to help you grow high-value fundraising results. That's the Major Gifts Mastery Programme and the Corporate Mastery Programme, which are starting again from mid-April 2024. Rather than have me tell you how they work, I thought it'd be most useful if you could hear directly from someone who's done one of these courses. So here is a short clip from Sam Harford, who's a philanthropy officer at the British Red Cross.
If you want to improve your major donor approaches and raise more money for your charity, I would really recommend Rob's Major Donor Mastery course. It was absolutely fantastic for me and built my confidence so much, and I really began to change my mindset and start focusing on cultivating for major donor relationships rather than major donor gifts. Since joining the programme, I've raised over £600,000 in pledges and donations, so I'm really grateful for all of the support and guidance from Rob.
If you'd like to find out more about these programmes, or our in-house training days, or any of our other training, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. So this is so interesting, Caroline, that you've noticed this pattern over and over. Any large gift, it just does need to be a collaboration between several colleagues to get anything of quality to happen. In practice, I've found this is just one of the hardest things, not least because that colleague of yours, be they the chief exec or the frontline support worker, their focus just is different. I bet they are a team player. They care about the overall mission, but they don't wake up worrying about the fundraising. So given that it's hard, could you tell us a couple of things you've learned about how to actually improve the likelihood of good cooperation and information sharing to get these applications done?
In the context of these 3 large grants, there was one thing that all had in common that made collaboration with leadership easy, and that was that each of these 3 grants, if one, would represent a large proportion of the annual budget. They were all for core costs, and so, of course, everybody was invested very heavily in making these happen. And a quick tip, if you're working for a large organisation and you're trying to engage a colleague in your fundraising activities and they're just not interested or you're not getting any traction, find another colleague, because there will be somebody who gets it. There will be somebody with whom you can build a relationship. And it's up to you to find who those fundraising superstars are and to nurture those relationships as you would a donor relationship.
That's a fabulous tip. And for the record, my last piece of advice on this is know that it's hard. Expect that you often will have some wonderful colleagues who, get back to you on time and so on and make time to chat. And in many charities, there will be some that just don't. And don't be surprised by that. But given what Caroline's just said about how important it is, if the first thing doesn't work, don't go off in a huff. Just take a deep breath, go for a walk, come back and think, what else could I try? Now, what different tactic could I in some way find, either to actually somehow find time to chat to this person, or if need be, have to go somewhere else. But it's that keep trying different things until you manage to get cooperation from enough of the right people internally, because without it, you're unlikely to win the big grants. And there's some other charities out there, other fundraisers out there who, the first thing doesn't work or the second thing doesn't work. And therefore that's that. And it is a poorer application for it. And if they'd only tried one more thing, then that could have made all the difference. I know that's not easy, and it takes a resilience and an emotional resource that sometimes we feel we don't have. But the idea of this whole conversation is to win the really big money, you just have to find a way to do at least these first 3 things. And maybe that can be inspiration to take a deep breath and keep plugging away, even though both Caroline and I agree with you, it's not easy.
Exactly. And getting started is the hardest thing. Once you've engaged a colleague in a conversation and they're on board and you've got the money and they are invited into that celebration and their role has been recognised, then it's a lot easier. It's the getting started. It's the hardest thing in the world.
I love this. And it harks back to the first point you made about just get a first gift in and then do wonderful stewardship from that. That also has an implication on getting that first step involving and building the relationship with your colleague. In terms of this fourth thing you noticed about these 3 successes, what's that?
So I'm going to tell a little story. I know that we love a story at Bright Spot. So those of you who came to a writing workshop I did last year will have heard this story. And this is a story about a colleague of mine who was fundraising director at a cathedral. And this fundraiser was making an application to Heritage Lottery. And if anybody has ever done a Heritage Lottery or National Lottery Heritage Fund bid, they will know that it is no mean feat. This was a large grant, multi-millions of pounds, days, hours, months of work, collaboration required from across the whole organisation. It's a huge, huge undertaking. And this colleague did a fantastic job on this application. And they received fantastic feedback from the funder, but they did not get the money. And they did not get the money not because of the quality of the work, but because there was another cathedral making a similar ask at the same time whose heritage need was deemed to be greater. It was just bad luck. And that's my fourth point, is that luck and timing will sometimes play a part. And in the case of the small startup charity that received lottery money after having an Awards for All gift, they were informed by the funding officer that there had been an underspend in the city of Plymouth, which is where they were based, and that they were looking to support some charities working in that specific geographical location. So, of course, it was an incredible funding bid, but also there was a degree of luck and some fortuitous timing that came into it as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that occur to me, Caroline. One is the more we can take our ego out of it. I definitely think working hard at your skills, your habits, looking after yourself, and so on, can make a big difference to your chances of winning a corporate pitch, your chances of an application for funding succeeding. If you focus on what you can influence, your so-called sphere of influence, rather than what you can control, you can increase the odds. Hooray! And in this complex, chaotic world, I think it also pays to acknowledge there's always things way beyond our control. And the truth is, sometimes you do all the right things and it works out. And also, sometimes you can do all the right things and it not work out. And that, unfortunately, is a part of life and certainly of fundraising. A long time ago, I remember being sat at school in my religious studies classes and they told me about the parable of the seeds. And forgive me, some of our listeners will know the detail better than me and its implications in terms of faith. But the bit I remember was, you need to sow 4 seeds. One of them might land on stony ground and one of them might land on weedy ground and therefore not thrive. And one of them might land on the path and one of them might land on fertile ground. And a 1 in 4 hit rate is pretty good. So don't be cross about the 3. Be grateful for the one that works out. I think what you're saying is if we do the first 3 things and pay attention to the hard work needed for the first 3 things you've talked about today, it dramatically, I think, increases our chances and hopefully maybe even a better than 1 in 4 chance. Hooray, better odds than in the parable of the seeds. But nevertheless, to acknowledge both elements of you can do all the right things and it increases your chances, and still sometimes you win and sometimes you lose.
Oh, I'm so here for this analogy, Rob, because I am an allotment gardener in my spare time. I think the parable also talks about the importance of tending the soil and actually making sure that the soil is good and fertile and that it doesn't have rocks in it and it doesn't have weeds in it. And you're absolutely right. It is a numbers game. We need to cast the net wide and we need to make sure that we are doing enough of the right things so that we get enough positive responses back. And then there's all the things about resilience and taking ego out of it. I agree with that too. And being able to process that rejection quickly, pragmatically, take the learning, move on, do the next thing which you know will generate the results. So it's nurturing the relationships, doing the research, connecting, communicating, wowing your donors. It's all of those things gives you more fertile ground then. So you're right. So then in time, more of your seeds will germinate because you took the time to get that solid foundation together.
And the truth is, you could sort of do all that thing and the timing might be wrong, but if you still stay in touch with that person, it doesn't mean that the next year or even just 1 month later, because of the quality of the relationship and the application you did, that actually that's the point where, for reasons completely beyond your control, because you did that work, you have increased your chances that that time the gift might come.
Absolutely. Timing is everything. Philanthropists will give money to charity on their terms at a time that suits them and their lives and respects everything that's happening around them in their lives. Absolutely. And a not now is not a no, for sure.
So there's one more thing that I've observed, Caroline. Most of what we talked about require a level of confidence, resilience, proactivity. Lots of these things don't happen on their own. You need to make them happen. You need to seek out a conversation with a colleague who may be busy that day and so on. And ultimately, whatever you can do to get yourself in a state where you're able to keep plugging away makes all the difference to whether you do the tactics or not. And I think one of those things is whether we can be kind to ourselves and the way we interpret what seems to be going on at other charities, whether that can make us feel less than, or actually, well, I'm doing okay for where I am. Could you just give me a parting word on what you've discovered as a fundraiser, especially, I guess, from the point of view of many of our listeners work in smaller charities and there just are fewer resources?
Yes, there are fewer resources. And that's why I wanted to share these examples today, because I recognise that it can be disheartening when you see an example somewhere else of a charity that has had incredible fundraising success. And unless you know the full context of what sits behind that success, you can't possibly make a judgment about yourself regarding your own capability. So please, please be kind to yourself when you see those examples, and please recognise that your starting point is likely to be very different from somebody else's, and that your charity context is likely to be very different, and try not to get drawn into a comparison because it won't serve you. Take it from me, you're doing a great job. Keep going. It's hard out there. It's really gnarly out there. Yeah,
thank you.
I'm with you.
Thank you, Caroline. And one of the reasons the members in our club really appreciate the sessions you've done is that comes across so strongly in your own fundraising and the way you teach and coach, because you get it and you therefore are able to help people make the use of where they are and what resources they've got and what they can do today without getting distracted or feeling disheartened by, for instance, a false comparison. So thank you for that. Very well said. Caroline, if people want to find out more, we'll put the link to your website, Larkowl, in the episode notes. I look forward to catching up with you again sometime, Caroline, because I always learn so much from our chats. But for now, Caroline Danks, thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Rob. It's been really fun. Thank you for having me.
Well, there you go. I hope you found our discussion helpful. As we always do, we'll put a summary and a full transcript in the episode notes on the podcast section of our Bright Spot website. And if you've not already subscribed to our show, please do click that button now. You'll get instant access to lots more examples and tips to help you with your fundraising. And we've got lots of new episodes which we're looking to release in the next few weeks, so please don't miss out. And if you'd like to find out more about our two long-standing flagship programs, that's Corporate Partnerships Mastery or the Major Gifts Mastery program, which have now helped many hundreds of people to raise more money over the last decade, we're now taking bookings for the next programs. We know from long experience that these courses always sell out, so if you'd like to find out more, please do that today if you can. All the information is at brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. And if you found today's podcast helpful and you think it would help other people too, please do share it on with your colleagues and with other good causes. I really appreciate your help. Do let us know what you think. On Twitter or X, Caroline is at LarkOwlUK and I am at Woods_Rob, and we're both on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fundraising Bright Spots show. Good luck with your fundraising, and I can't wait to share more encouraging stories with you very soon.